So probably the neither of those I would want to send towards my customers, to be honest.
You gotta send them somewhere. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Cards Against Complexity. Today with Katharina Lueth from Raisin. Kati, welcome on the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're in a special edition of this podcast. We're live from FIBE. Hi everyone who's listening in. You just came back from the conference stage, center stage with Handelsblatt here, a few other fintechs, including Wise on stage. You had a whole conversation about the current market environment, about the complexities that everybody's facing. We'll dive into this in a bit and your journey at Raisin. But before we do that, can you tell us a bit about yourself? What brought you into financial services and into your current role at Raisin?
So Katharina Lueth, I'm Chief Client Officer at Raisin. I've actually been with Raisin 11 years, so a bit of a fintech dinosaur at this point almost. And admittedly, I've been in financial services since I finished my studies. So my previous career, I was in consulting, but even then I worked mainly for banks and other financial services companies, and always found that extremely interesting and exciting. And when I then left consulting, I was extremely happy to join the back then very young fintech sector that said, let's try and see if we can do things a little bit differently.
When was that about?
That was 2014.
So 2014, I mean, FIBE is now a 2-year-old event, I think. That was early fintech days by any measure.
Yes.
You joined Raisin in the very early days. Tell us a bit more about Raisin.
Yes, so Raisin is a savings and investments marketplace. So we connect retail investors or savers with banks largely, and we offer high interest rate products. So people can access easy access accounts, they can access term deposit accounts, and in Germany also pension products and investment products. We're a global company at this point, so we're active in 10 markets across the EU, UK, and US.
And that's been quite a journey, I guess, since 2014. It's 11 years. We'll jump into this journey in a second, from, I guess, early days to global player. Before we do that, this podcast is called Cards Against Complexity. So I've got cards with me.
Great.
You don't have the benefit of having seen them before. I did have a sneak peek, and they are here. Those cards are just for you. They're made for you. And for everyone who hasn't listened into the podcast yet, Cards Against Complexity, similar principle to Cards Against Humanity. We've got one sentence to complete, and there's 3 options for you. They might not be perfect, but you got to choose one.
I'll choose one. Okay.
Let's see what we've got here. So your new AI tool optimizes deposits to get the best returns. However, we've got a little problem. It starts by excluding any bank whose IBAN contains the number 13.
Right.
It makes deposits only at banks that give welcome gifts like a toaster. Or it switches all deposits into a metaverse bank with no physical address.
So probably the neither of those I would want to send towards my customers, to be honest.
You gotta send them somewhere. Sometimes you don't have a choice.
If I gotta send them somewhere, I suspect the one that would still get the best results for my customers would be the first one. So excluding banks with an IBAN that contains the number 13, because I'm sure there's ways around it. As long as we don't exclude BICs, but rather IBANs, I'm sure there's a solution to be found in assigning new IBANs if it ends up being a 13 in there. So I'll have to go with that one.
So very, very cool. We'll take this one. So we play a bit on numbers. We find a way around those numbers. Yeah. Maybe we look into the details of how those numbers were created in the first place. And then finally our customers get the product they want, although our AI didn't really help here. Now, that's obviously a scenario that ideally you don't want to run into.
Yes.
And you've done other things, innovating even before the age of AI with Raisin. Maybe we take a step back a bit into this journey. Probably many people here at FIBE know Raisin. Not everyone else listening to this podcast might know Raisin. So maybe take us into what does Raisin do, first of all, and then take us a bit through the journey of where you got to.
So indeed, where do we come from? Ultimately, what we want to create is financial peace of mind for retail savers and investors. So we want to help them make their money perform better. And where did we start? We started with savings products, because if you look at the classical journey of anyone who starts saving and investing their money, you always end up starting with a savings product. So basically, everyone typically as a teenager or sort of late teens typically starts back in the day with a savings book where you took your piggy bank to the bank. Nowadays, it's a Tagesgeld in German, so an easy access account. But that's typically where the journey starts for most people on their journey towards building their wealth. And we believe that we should help people optimize and find higher interest rates, because in the end, oftentimes my house bank will not offer the best interest rate. And given that, especially in Germany, a lot of people have a fairly high share of their money in savings rather than invested, we felt it's very important to at least help them optimize the return on the money there. And we started with the idea of basically allowing people not just to optimize within Germany, but within the whole European Union, because in the end, at least in theory, we have a single market. So it should be as easy to open a bank account in Sweden as it should be in Germany. And so that's where we originally started from. We started purely in Germany. Again, since then, we've grown to 10 markets. Also, when I joined, we were around 25 people. Now we're around 750. So a lot has changed in 10 years, let's say.
And that's a big journey, and we'll jump into this in a second. However, going from that like very basic product, innovating a basic product like savings in Germany, which is very savings oriented in many ways, almost creating your own single market before the single market came. I heard your conversation around this. What's been the biggest, I guess, challenges on that way in the early years? And I'm thinking here from the eyes of a fintech founder who's going through this maybe a second time. What are the early challenges you ran into that somehow were like a make or break point that you would say if you would be on this journey again, you would advise to look at?
So I think the early days we had sort of 2 or 3 challenges. The entire world was not quite as digital, right? So I think video identification was allowed a few months after I joined Raisin. So we actually started from a product where you still needed to physically go to a post office to identify yourself, which was a beautiful one. But one of the other challenges, and I think this is always a tricky one in early days. So we have integrated a couple of 100 banks on our backend that are offering their products. And especially at the beginning, it's that trade-off between, do I go to banks and say, here's my one standard way how to do it, take it or leave it? That's something you cannot afford in the early days. But then as you grow, you need to go and standardize to ensure scalability, because there comes a point when you say, I can no longer allow every single bank to have it exactly their way. So how do I create a setup that's on the one hand side standardized enough that it's still easy for you to scale? And on the other hand, how do you account for the specific needs? For example, if a bank tells you I have to ask the following 5 questions to a client in onboarding,
which they have to.
They have to. And then there's very limited room for negotiation around those questions. So, and that's something in fintech in general. So that trade-off between complexity to especially get your early customers on board, but then finding that way back towards something that's scalable, I think is important to solve for in the early days.
Would love to dive just for a second into this, because like complexity, I mean, it's at the heart of the podcast, and I love to think about this. Now you've seen a pattern of complex banks that you onboarded. You get to that point, you want to simplify. What do you find is like, maybe you can see as a pattern or something that you would say that's how you break that complexity when it appears? Like, when is the point to do this?
It's always tricky, and there's always a trade-off, right? So even nowadays, if the customer is big enough, you'll still do it, right? So if a very, very large global bank comes to you and says, well, we need something tailor-made, you need to take that trade-off in terms of saying, okay, here it's worth it. But at some point you need to almost think of a threshold where you say, okay, if it's less than this, we really need to stay firm and really say, okay, this is sort of the 3 options. And yes, you need some option of configuring, let's say. But you need to think of those thresholds, and ideally they move up over time. And then you shouldn't underestimate the amount of effort that you then also need to invest to get your existing clients sort of towards the standard over time, because that's the other thing. As you prove to your clients that you are providing a huge value add, they will likely also be more willing to then invest, for example, into sort of a more automated solution versus a manual one.
Yeah. That's super interesting, going to that customer perspective and client perspective. In financial services in general, trust is important.
Yes.
In your case, you're aggregating financial services and products across for your customers, and they have to trust you and every single bank and every single product behind. What are you doing to get that customer trust and earn it every single day? Because that's probably where it lies.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, the beautiful thing about savings products is they're fairly standardized. So even across borders. So if you were to think of, let's say, insurance products as the other side of the spectrum, there it's very, very difficult to compare and to understand all the features and what's in the fine print.
Yeah.
Whereas for a savings product, you have a fairly simple set of things. You have an interest rate, you have an investment amount. You can either break it or not.
Yeah.
And you have
there's some time horizon.
There's a time horizon, but sort of it's a fairly limited number of dimensions. So it's a lot easier to compare. And then the other thing that in the end is helping us is obviously every savings product we offer comes from a fully licensed bank. Mm-hmm. And in the end, the service promise comes from Raisin, but then the trust in the sense of I put my money in a bank and there is a second safety net behind it, which is a harmonized deposit guarantee scheme framework. So while we do have national deposit guarantee schemes in Europe, the way they work is standardized across Europe so that people also have sort of a similar way of how it would work in case something were to ever happen to a bank.
And now this is like your early day journey, savings products, rolling this out to new markets. Now you went to the US, now you're in 10 other markets. How do you, I guess, scale trust? And by extension, I mean, that's part of your team, scale the service and the customer interactions around this, because in the end, you're a digital product, but there's humans behind, there's customers behind that need, where you suddenly need to have the same trust that you had in Germany, also with customers in the US. How do you do that?
So for the US specifically, but also for the UK, we actually have local teams on the ground and local entities, because it is, again, it's a very separate market. Whereas in the EU, you can take a somewhat different approach. So we service a lot of our EU markets from Germany, actually. So it's important to have that local knowledge. Then for the EU, for the UK and US, we actually also have a local offering. So it's really local banks that function within the local regulatory scheme, which makes it, again, a bit easier for people to trust because it's local. And then indeed, it's also a lot about the service you put out there. So you need to build that trust, right? Yeah. So, it's consistent investment in it. We also strongly believe still that you still need to have people answering the phone when it's about money. People have by now a huge preference to get stuff sorted in self-service and digitally, but if ever something goes wrong, they want to be able to call and talk to a human. So that is something that we also see is still quite important, actually.
And that's there. It's a human that's local, a human that understands me, a human maybe also regulatory in that local entity. Yeah. If you now look at your journey at Raisin, because now like you've come from this initial savings product days to a global company. It's been 11 years. Maybe it's another 11 years. I don't know. But like, what's been most exciting and what keeps you going at this? Because 11 years is in any measure of a life, of a career, is a long time. There got to be something really exciting. What keeps you going? What keeps you excited on this journey?
So I think 2 or 3 things. So as I mentioned, we started with 25 people in a single market, single product, and now it's multiple products, multiple markets. So it's a different company. So I haven't worked for 11 years in the same company, although it's always been Raisin, but the way it works, the way it's evolved, the way our processes have evolved is very different. So, and it's been exciting to see that transition. And I still believe the next couple of years will remain as exciting. Yeah. And then for me, it's the combination of I really believe that the products we offer to our customers is something that helps them build their wealth in a meaningful way, and in a way that is very cost efficient, and cost, especially on the investment side, is one of the key drivers for return. And then on the other hand, on the savings side, the higher interest rates. And what I believe is a very fantastic corporate culture also plays a very big role in it, of course.
And corporate culture, I mean, keeping that with 700 plus team members from the early days of 25. That's been a few transitions. Like, how many companies in between? Like, is this like, does this feel like 3 companies, or like how much?
Probably more. For me, it was, to be honest, sort of going from like 40, 50 to 100. That was a huge transition. And then definitely also as we got more international. So if I think back, for a fairly long time, we were 90% of people in Berlin, in the office, so pre-COVID times. And then at some point we bought the bank. So then we had 2 places, and then we had the UK, but it was still sort of 80% in Berlin in the office. And then came COVID. And during COVID, we also merged with Deposit Solutions, which then also increased our footprint even more across different offices, and teams are now a lot more distributed. So that definitely was another one, where it's then a very different way of working, for sure.
Yeah, and I mean that's a long journey for everyone. Joining you on that way. So if I'm now thinking about, I go through a similar journey in a different company, what would you say to be able to go with all these transitions, to be able to look back after 11 years? This is still for me. What do you think is something you would advise your younger self to prepare for, or to do, or to be open for in this journey?
Yeah. So I think resilience is really important, because it's not a linear, right? So afterwards you're like, of course it worked out. It's great. Like it made, of course it's a fantastic company and it's all great and we're profitable, etc. But obviously the journey is not like this, but it's a roller coaster ride. Yeah. So resilience in any startup, I think, is a key skill, or ability to have, and really also that willingness to adjust, and sort of you need a bit your North Star of where you're headed, but you need to adjust along the way, especially going back to the earlier discussion, given the volatile times we live in, it's extremely important to be able to adapt as you go.
Very exciting. I would love to actually dive much deeper into this, but I have one final question that I don't want to miss. And that's around, like, I mean, you're a female leader in financial services and fintech. I think you're very, very vocal and open about this as well. I mean, just by being there, being out there. I just saw the Girls' Day at Raisin is one initiative, I guess, that's going on. Tell us a bit about, like, as a female leader, and maybe knowing that others listen, what's something you would say in that journey beyond resilience that you would say, look out for this, or this is my advice to my younger self?
If you plan on having kids, the most important career choice you're going to make is choosing your partner wisely. Very important for anyone planning on a family. Mm-hmm. But also indeed choose your employer very wisely, because there are employers that see family and diversity as something great that it is, and there are others that see it as an obstacle. And I think that's really a mindset. So choose wisely where you go, because you want to be in an environment where people feel happy for you when you say you want to have a family at some point. If they're not, then get out of the door as fast as you can. Yeah,
and that's I guess you didn't run out of that door.
I did not run out of that door.
You're in that door, and you've been on this journey for 11 years, and yes. Resilience on the startup journey, on all other journeys probably as well in there. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. This was super insightful. I think a very inspiring journey, not only for Raisin, I guess, which lots of founders are looking up to, from the journey from the early days all the way to today, but also your own journey in this. Thanks for sharing this with us.
Thank you, Jan.
And thank you, everyone who listened in. Really enjoyed this conversation with Katharina Lueth from Raisin. If you want to listen into a few more conversations, there's 2 more coming up today and a few more tomorrow. But Katharina, enjoy the rest of FIBE. Great to see you here, and all the best for the next 11 years at Raisin.
Thank you.